Chapter 5. Tommy turned the BMW into an alley on a residential block just across from the Navy Yard. Alex sat shotgun, while Janet and Layla rode in the rear seats. They had already dropped Elias off in an old crane where he would be watching over the insertion team. "I'm in position, ground team. Doesn't look like they have many manning the entrance. There's a lot of trucks, though." Elias's voice came in over the comm. "What about the hell chopper?" Alex asked. "It's on the landing pad. Good amount of men up there," Eli called back. Alex turned around in his seat and looked from Janet to Layla. "Ideas?" "Elias, can you hear me?" Janet asked, pressing her finger to her ear. "Yeah." "Take out the guards at the gate and anyone who scurries around after them. We don't want anyone to see us coming," Janet commanded. Alex nodded towards Janet. "All right, I like that. Combat inside should be relatively easy if we have the jump on them," Alex said. The team poured out of the BMW. Each held their weapons close. Two booming shots rang out and the ground team began their rush. "Two down," Elias said. "Doesn't look like anyone saw it, but they had to hear it." As Alex and his team sprinted past several defunct vehicles and debris from the broken road, he caught the night sky becoming lighter. The sun was rising at their backs, but the darkness still enveloped the base. He gripped his rifle hard when they reached the gate. Elias's shot had blown through the glass window and into the neck of the witless guard. "You said you guys don't have any formal weapons training?" Alex thought it was weird that Janet asked that over the communicator, until he looked over by Morrison's supply trucks. She was dragging the other guard's body under it. "Clean shots from that high up, Slick." Janet was amused. "Focus," Alex said as he moved in. "Anything in here we can use?" "Not unless you want to carry it out. These trucks probably haven't moved in years," Janet replied. Tommy, who had been relatively quiet up to that point, reached inside his jacket and pulled out a pair of bolt cutters. "Hey, better to look than not," he said as he snapped the rusting lock on the back of the door with ease. The back door in the truck flung open slowly on its rusted hinges. "Holy shit," Janet said, recognizing the shape and label on the boxes. She wanted to step closer, but even through the scope, Elias could see her hesitation. "What? What are they?" Alex asked as he jogged over to Janet. "Explosives. Missiles, to be more accurate. They were probably meant for helicopters and jet fighters before the war," she explained. "Why would Morrison leave something so valuable out in the open?" Layla asked as she moved away from the truck. "Maybe he doesn't know. Not like the man comes down here to inspect this shit himself," Tommy scoffed. "Could have forgot. It's not easy keeping track of an entire military supply caches. I mean, these don't look like they've moved in years," Janet added. "What's that look you're giving me?" she asked towards Alex. "Another idea. Can you rig this to blow?" Alex asked. "Only if we're out of here once it goes up." She kneeled beside the truck's bumper and placed several of the red flashing stickers on it. "Good thing you're a crack shot, Elias. Otherwise this would have been ended before we even got here," Janet continued. "Oh, that's a cheery thought." Elias's reply was thick with static. "Come on, we don't have a lot of time before they send a patrol," Alex said, leading them towards the main building. The old Navy building was considerably bare of anything except for walls, floors, and 24-year-old dust. Alex couldn't believe that in Morrison's haste to steal anything and everything with the United States military insignia, he had forgotten that many explosives. As they neared the stairs at the far end of the warehouse, he made out several shadows standing just in front of the steps. "Wait," he called out, just above a whisper, then looked over at Janet. She was already screwing a suppressor onto her rifle. Alex gave her a quick nod, and she moved up a few paces ahead of him. With a flip of a switch, Janet changed over the rifle from automatic to single shot and fired off 2 quick rounds. One into the first guard's neck, and another at the second's chest. "Down clean," she said in a low tone. Alex was the first to move up with Layla in tow. He stood over the bodies with a single fist raised. Janet could see him checking the stairs, scoping for other hostiles. When his hand finally opened, she and Tommy made a dash over. "How is it in there?" Elias's voice asked over the comm. "We're moving up," Alex replied. "This place is too empty. There's no way he's using this as a barracks. Any movement up top?" The team continued to move forward as they waited for more intel from Elias. "The guards have changed direction a few times. Hard to tell if they've noticed the gunfire. If they have, they're not doing anything about it." Layla tugged on the back of Alex's jacket. "I don't like this." she said. Alex turned his head and gave her a shrug, but she continued. A platoon of men up top that aren't responding to gunfire? And what about those explosives? You're right. This feels off, Alex replied. For a moment, he wasn't sure what to do. If Morrison had set a trap, they had walked right into it, lured into an enemy warehouse with little cover and no high ground advantage. And if that didn't work, the explosives would. Alex, what's going on? Elias's voice crackled through the thick static. Layla has a hunch. We walked right into a trap. Eli, check the men on the roof for detonators. Alex gave Janet a quick glance, and she offered him a hard one in return. It's too late to back out now, she said. He'll have to take him down. The comm crackled to life. Detonator. Ooks. James Morrison. Comm static is getting worse all the time. Fucking concrete walls, Tommy commented. Yeah, no shit, Janet replied. Eli, shoot that thing out of the fucker's hands. Better yet, shoot the detonator and smash it. There was no reply through the comm. This deep in the building, the comm was useless. Janet moved over to Alex and gave him a knock in the chest with her rifle. Time to wake up, street kid. We need to get to the roof. Alex was taken aback by her hit, but he didn't have time to respond to it. Janet pushed past him with Tommy and Layla right behind her. If we don't get to that chopper, Morrison's going to blow us all to hell, she yelled. That was all the inspiration Alex needed. He raced up the steps after his team. James Morrison stood on the ramp of his hell chopper and watched his men change their direction. He clutched the detonator to his father's explosives tightly. It had only been at the last minute that the general had convinced his father to rig this scheme to thin the Crusaders' numbers. Autonelli had a hunch that if the location of the Morrison hell chopper was leaked, then it would bring the Crusaders running. James thought it a shame to lose such a large facility for the military. There was plenty of room for soldiers, weapons, and the excess his father had come about during his domineering over New Purgatory. He'd have it all for himself one day. Maybe he'd even build statues dedicated to the men who had lured the Crusaders inside. To James, it was fitting they be killed by an ambush, if only as revenge for his squad. Begrudgingly, he admitted that General Autonelli was indeed as intelligent as his father had said. James had been worried that a street gang wouldn't come. He knew this kind of mission was suicide, but that had not concerned them in S4. Ames, have you checked in with the patrol team in the building? Sir, patrol team is down. We have unidentified soldiers in the... Ames's comm cut out. Ames? Ames, where are they? James yelled back through his comm. It would have helped if they had some time to figure out where the Crusaders were in the building. At any moment, he could have had his pilot take off and get to a safe detonation distance. But his pride was still suffering the beating he had taken from his father and the general. And the street gang. If he could hold this facility and end the Crusaders' threat here, his father would regard him as a hero. Omega Team, change of plans. Ready your weapons and train them on that exit. We're not losing a base just to kill this scum. James Morrison reached down and grabbed the pistol holstered to his boot and started down the ramp. Rays of sunlight were beginning to shine down on him and his men. He spared just a moment to look across the metropolitan horizon, the beauty of steel touching blood-orange skies. I'm not missing you this time, motherfucker, Elias said to himself as he squeezed the trigger of his high-caliber sniper rifle. The bullet screamed through the air and slammed into the younger Morrison's elbow, taking the man's forearm off at the bone. Elias watched as James fell to the ground, clutching at the bleeding stump where his elbow had once been. Morrison's down. Detonator dropped. For Alex, that came in clear enough. He had finally recomposed himself after his lapse in decision-making. He raced up past Janet's grueling pace and hopped stairs in sets of 3. He credited Janet for waking him up. He knew he didn't have all the answers, but she had been fighting even longer than he had. Her taking a leadership role didn't bother him at all. When the group reached the top of the stairwell, Alex gave the team a quick glance and they returned it with nods all around. Even if Morrison is down, he probably has his men trained on the door to the helipad. I can confirm that. Elias was coming in more clearly now that they were on the top floor. And we need a distraction, Tommy said slyly as he pulled out a grenade from his jacket pocket. Those trucks weren't just carrying missiles. Tommy lobbed the grenade down the short hallway towards the helipad exit. The group covered their eyes, but they were expecting an explosion, not a bright flash. "Fuck!" Elias yelled into his communicator. "What was that?" Janet didn't feel anything except rage as she raised her rifle. Blinded as she was, she fired round after round at the Marines. Her weapon's smart lock made taking down the guards a breeze, even if they were just dark silhouettes to a bright white background. She moved forward a step at a time as colors and shapes began to make sense again. The others were still wary to move. She could see Elias had put in a fair share of work from the crane as the thinning number of guards elected to fall back to the hellchopper. Janet turned her head back towards the team, who were now offering their fire support. "Don't let them escape," she yelled. The rest of the team began sprinting for the door in Janet's wake until they were all outside. There were bodies and body parts strewn about the helipad. None more obvious than James Morrison's, who still laid on his back, grasping for his lost arm and screaming loudly above the gunfire. Janet fought the urge to put a bullet in him without delay. He may have only been Morrison's son, but to Janet, he was just an extension of the man himself, or at least his ego. Alex and Layla made their way over to the ramp that the remaining soldiers had closed behind them. The only thing left was to clear the chopper and steal it away. "Tommy!" Janet yelled before the man reached the hellchopper's ramp. "Come help me with this." Layla tapped a few buttons on the hellchopper's side panel for the ramp. After a moment, it lowered itself to the ground. Alex quickly loaded another clip into his rifle, then turned the corner, ran up, and fired into the hiding Marines. Layla used her position just off the ramp as cover and leaned out, blind firing her SMG into the group. The surprise of the ramp opening had left the soldiers vulnerable as they were waiting for the pilot to take off. Alex forced his way into the heart of the hellchopper and slammed his rifle into the closest Marine, who decided to bring the fight to him hand to hand. Alex spun the man around and forced his rifle under the helpless soldier's arm, using him as a human shield. While the remaining Marines focused on trying to bring him down, Layla sprang up from her cover on the exterior and sprayed the soldiers who were out in the open. When it was clear they were no longer being shot at, Alex let the gasping, bullet-riddled Marine fall to the ground. He spared a glance over at Layla, who looked visibly shaken. "Got a cut above your eye," he said as he raised his rifle again and made for the cockpit door. "You can stitch it up later," she replied, winded. Layla moved up the ramp and trained her SMG on the door, ready for Alex to breach it. With a quick spin of the handle, the door swung open. "Wait!" Layla almost pulled down hard on the trigger, but the blood splattered on the cockpit canopy just behind the curly-haired redhead, and the dead Morrison pilot encouraged her otherwise. She let her SMG fall to her side as Alex moved a step ahead. His rifle was still raised. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. "Naola Hargraven, Australian Rangers, and a friend of Jack Newsom. If you put that rifle down, I'm sure we can all have a wonderful conversation as to what I'm doing here," she said. Alex couldn't hear any fear in her words, or see it in her eyes. There were signs of age on her forehead and around her eyes, but Alex was willing to bet she was only in her 30s. He decided against his better judgment and slung the rifle across his shoulders. "How do you know the old man?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "We served together." Naola paused and let a smile come across her face at the memories that surfaced. "A long time ago. He needed my help again, and I'd never turn that man down. Not for anything." The ranger broke herself away from the nostalgia of the past and continued. "As a ranger, I have full access to each of the remaining 6 governments. I can go anywhere, see anything, and report anything. That was part of my country's deal in releasing and helping test Cloudbreaker." This was a surprise to Alex. He had been fighting just to stop Morrison, but he always carried a subtle hope that if his struggle gained national attention, the other nations would attempt to depose the tyrant politically. The truth would become apparent. "So you've known about all the murders, about Project Blood Boil? The rest of the world has just been sitting on their hands gathering information?" Alex asked accusingly. "That man has more power in the world than you understand. And we did try," Naola lashed back, "but we didn't succeed. The rest of the world knows exactly what John Morrison does, but they don't care. Each one of the other 5 surviving nations has their own problems. Most are just trying to grow food and avoid another international war." Those were facts Alex couldn't dispute. Despite his struggle, he was just another soul in a world rocked by the nuclear war. It wasn't a wonder the other nations weren't quick to rush to each other's aid at the risk of death. "Then why are you here?" Layla asked while Alex tried to cool himself off. "Spying on the little one, of course." Naola lifted a finger and pointed down to James Morrison, who Janet and Tommy were hauling up the ramp, before promptly dropping him hard on the deck. "There's an advantage in being able to change identities for a time. And downsides. I played advisor for a few months. It's how Jack knew where this bird would be. Not that I don't appreciate the intel, but what about the explosives?" Alex asked. "What explosives?" Naola replied, looking confused. Alex turned to Layla and shook his head. "You were right." He left the two in the cockpit and went over to Janet and Tommy. Layla watched as Janet dropped the detonator in Alex's hands and then directed Tommy to the cockpit. Naola and Layla went over to Alex, who was staring at the detonator. "He'll get us up in the air," Alex said, glaring at Tommy as he strode by. "This is wired to those trucks down there." He watched as Naola stared at it for a moment, but then she shrugged her shoulders. "I wasn't privy to everything. Morrison probably changed the plan at the last minute. His new general has made him more paranoid than ever. Your attacks did not help in that regard." The hull around and below them began to rumble and shake. The Hellchopper was beginning its ascent. "Plan on using that?" the Ranger asked. Alex walked over to one of the oval-shaped windows inside the Hellchopper. He could see the entire Navy Yard as they rose in the sky. No doubt, Tommy was hovering towards the crane to pick up Elias. Janet opening the ramp confirmed his guess. Alex only looked back at Naola when they had cleared the crane, and when he tapped the button. The explosion rocked their bird, but Tommy had no trouble maintaining control. Alex tossed the detonator on the ground and slumped down onto one of the crew seats in the hold. "Tommy, get us the hell out of here." Jack and the rest of the team were already waiting at the top of the club with all the needed materials for their long trip. Elias carried up one of the many ammo containers, being careful to sidestep around James Morrison. He wanted to at least tie a cloth around the man's arm, but Alex seemed content to let the man bleed out on the chopper's deck. Elias pushed the cockpit door open and saw Tommy in the pilot's chair, cleaning the blood off the glass and many controls to the bird's systems. He placed his crate beside one of the panels and walked up behind Tommy. "Probably not one of our better runs," Elias said, resting a hand on the back of the pilot's chair. Tommy turned his head slightly and looked back at the younger man. "Yeah, especially if you were on the ground," the pilot said sarcastically. Elias let the comment go. He knew that if he hadn't been up in the tower, the ground team would have been dead. "So what's the plan after we load all this shit up?" Tommy asked as Elias was making his way back for the door. "I'm not sure yet, but I know Morrison's kid will take priority," Elias said as he pushed the steel door open. Just outside, Alex, Layla, and Janet were talking and standing over James Morrison. Elias moved over to the group and got Alex's attention. "Tommy wants to know where we're headed after this," Eli said. Alex's arms were crossed. He had heard what Elias said, but his mind was focused elsewhere. He also wondered where the Australian Ranger had gone. She had disappeared when they landed back at Alon's foes. Eli knew what Alex wanted to do with Morrison, but his friend looked like he was trying just as hard to convince himself to go through with it. "We go to the dead zone in England like we planned," Alex spoke loud enough so Tommy could hear him. "And him?" Elias pointed to James. "You should just let me end him here. Morrison killed my dad. Let me kill his son." Janet's words dripped with anger. Alex turned his head back to look at her, but dismissed her request. "No. As much as I'd like to do that myself, we aren't going to throw away this opportunity." He let his arms fall to his side. "But we're going to need Otto." "You want me to do a flyby on the Empire State Building?" Tommy asked, exhausted. The hold was now filled with the entire team. Even Jack was listening intently to Alex's suggestion. "This is war, and we need to make sure Morrison gets that message. I want him to know, no matter how hard it comes down on us, we will pay him back in kind." Alex looked down at the tied-up man, whose objections were a muffled audible with the duct tape wrapped over his mouth. Otto hadn't spoken a word since Alex had made his suggestion. He wondered if the large man was just as conflicted by moral outcomes as he was. Fuck, if he won't do it, let me. I like this idea, Janet responded for the convict. Finally, Otto made some sign that he was part of the conversation by letting out a chuckle. You're almost too much like your father, the big man said as he glared across the hole at Jack. The old man looked back at him and then shook his head. Otto focused his attention back on Alex. You're the boss. Can't say that little greaseball will follow your orders, though. Otto motioned over to Tommy, who was more interested in combing his hair with his hands as he used his glasses like a mirror. Oh, ease up on the name-calling, big guy. I enjoy a good thrill, I just don't have to like it. There's plenty of rope for drop-off teams in storage. I'll go string up a few right now. Alex wanted to laugh at how quickly Tommy changed his tune after Otto had agreed, but decided to keep the briefing on point. After this is done, we burn Skye to England and we find Dell Johnston. He folded his arms, signaling that he was finished speaking. You want to talk about a big fuck you, then this is it, Elias commented. The others seemed to be thinking about the implications of Alex's plan. Jack had already spoken his piece on the issue, and instead took to helping Tommy rope the makeshift harness for Otto. While he and Tommy were working on a way to keep the convict hoisted, Janet sat down in front of the prone and tied James Morrison. Alex turned and looked down the Hellchopper's ramp. He was debating on catching another hour of sleep rather than watch the exchange. Instead, he bid for a moment of fresh air. You got a smoke? He asked Elias. His friend was about to respond, but Layla cut him off. I do, she said, displaying it in front of his face. Then sauntered down the ramp while placing it in her mouth. Alex let his eyes follow her all the way down until she stopped near the edge of the building they sat down on. You, got all that worked out, right? Elias whispered. Alex wasn't quick to respond, but only because he still had his eyes focused on Layla. Hey, Elias yelled, giving Alex a light shove. His friend came out of his daydream and turned his head. Yeah, I thought so. Alex moved down the ramp at a quicker pace, and then stopped and turned about halfway down the ramp. Can you handle the rest of the flight prep? What's there to prep? Stringing up the big guy doesn't exactly require my oversight, Elias replied sarcastically. Alex didn't bother to respond to that, and kept on down the ramp. Elias shook his head. Off again when his best friend dropping everything that ever mattered for him just for a smoke and time with his girl. There was no point in being upset. Elias knew Alex had his weaknesses and she was one of them. But if he needed 5 minutes to smoke or hold on to her, or simply take in everything they were all fighting for, then Elias had no problem letting the weight shift to his shoulders. It was how they had stayed alive for so long, and how they'd continue to stay alive. He eyed the hold. Tyler had begun helping Otto's makeshift harness, but Janet was taunting the younger Morrison. Elias watched as she slapped him in the face and spit expletives at him. He might have reserved that for the elder Morrison. How many children have you killed, you rich little fuck? How many families have you torn apart? She slapped him hard across the face as she yelled. To Morrison's credit, he made no audible response, not out of pain or resistance. Part of Elias wanted to keep watching her because he believed the kid deserved it. However, he did question how far she would go if given the chance. While torture was an old-world technique that fascinated Elias, he knew what it did to the torturer. You know, he's probably had a tough day, he commented, looking down on Janet. It was a quaint remark, given how he'd shot the man's forearm off not an hour earlier. Janet clenched her hand into a fist and gave the younger Morrison one final swing at his nose, which started to drip blood. Yeah? Well, I've had a hard life, she responded as she stood and faced Elias. She pressed a boot down on James's head and used it like a footrest. She could have easily knocked out a few of his teeth with a kick, but restrained herself, and instead forced his face down into the deck. Does brutalizing him before we kill him change that? Elias asked. Janet lifted her boot from James's head and stared at Elias. It makes me feel better, she spat. His father made his own decisions, Elias said, cutting her off. We're going to make him pay for that. We don't need to taunt this fucker. He'll be gone soon, and you're still going to be mad. Save it for what's ahead, He's not worth it. Janet looked angry, but she knew Elias was right. The excitement of having captured Morrison's child had driven her too far. Fine, she said, putting her sunglasses on, but I get to kill the other Morrison. Elias shook his head. Never had he met such a volatile yet striking woman. Janet motioned for him to follow, and he did. No one's in the cockpit, right? She asked him, leaning in close. Elias crossed his arms, but Janet pulled them down and grabbed his hands. Come on, Slick. I know you'd rather string me up than watch what happens to that poor fuck. Janet could see the lust Elias tried so hard to hide, the way he'd looked at her since she had arrived. He wanted her. Elias nodded his head and let Janet pull him into the cockpit, slamming the door behind them as the others continued their work. Any chance you want to share that with me? Alex asked as he stepped just behind Layla and wrapped his arms around her. Of course, she replied, pulling the cigarette out of her mouth and placing it in his. Are you doing all right? He asked. It was pretty tense back at the naval base. You froze up when it all came together for you, she replied, looking off at the cityscape. Alex didn't say anything for a while. They both just looked out on the horizon. The neon-coated entertainment district still glimmered in the morning light. Even in the broken world, there was natural beauty here that couldn't be destroyed, or at least that's what Alex thought. It's not going to happen again, he said softly. I know. You're too determined to let it happen again, she replied. I wouldn't give myself that much credit. Janet led that charge. And you learned from it. Alex squeezed her. She knew him all too well. Yeah, you're right. You can't see it, but I'm smiling, she said. Then turn around and let me see. As she did, he planted a kiss on her cheek, and she responded by kissing his lips. Layla wrapped her arms around his neck, and Alex dropped the cig off the side of the building. She stared at him for a while, and he did the same. You have beautiful eyes, she commented. Alex had always hated his brown eyes and loved Layla's blue ones. I'd rather have yours, he responded. Layla smiled again, but he could never tell if it was forced. Something else was off. Nervous about going home? He asked as he pulled away. I think I'm more scared than anything. When I left, everything was the perfect memory I still have. But now, she rested her head on his shoulder. Alex clasped his arms back around her. If there's time, I want to see if my parents' house is still standing. I don't have anything but my necklace to remind me of them. If we can find it, we will. Alex didn't care if they had time or not. He was going to keep his promise. Well, that's something else to look forward to, Layla said. Is everything else all right? You seem like you're out of it, he asked. It's all becoming real, isn't it? She asked. Being on the move has kept it out of focus. It's hard to realize what's going on, to understand it when we're running from or into death every few minutes, Alex replied. Not for me, Layla replied. The robbery, I maimed a man. He didn't even have a chance to fight back, and then I executed him shortly before killing his friends. You did what you had to do, Alex replied. Layla shook her head. No, we're not murderers, Alex. There's always a better way. If there isn't, then we're no better than John Morrison. Alex hung his head. They were on the offensive now. He worried about what atrocities they would have to commit. Blowing away the Navy Yard, setting prisoners free, all that collateral damage just for one end goal. We gotta keep moving forward, but we'll do it with our souls intact, Layla. I won't become like him or Jack or anyone else. Neither of us will. War can change people, she replied. Alex nodded. We'll use it to change people's lives, here and everywhere. Layla smiled. She believed him. Then let's go do it. Layla took one of Alex's hands and pulled him back up the Hellchopper's ramp. Otto had on the kind of grin only a devious criminal who had spent too many days without seeing the sun could wear. He held James Morrison's body in a cradle, while enjoying the wind blowing through what was left of his whitening hair. The younger Morrison, on the other hand, looked terrified, and Otto found pleasure in that. Before he was a prisoner, before he'd even heard of Jack Newsom, Otto was a member of a biker gang turned private soldier. It wasn't the most popular profession after the wars, but he made his fair share of money when the U.S. military decided to bring in private soldiers in more formal roles with the regular military. The tattoos that covered his arms were mixes of old patriotic pride and biker ink that no longer mattered in this new world. Morrison offered no struggle after the chopper had taken off. Otto thought it would be fun to drop him on the corner of a skyscraper just to see how well the kid could bounce. After a few moments, the big man took a deep breath and leaped from the ramp of the hell chopper. He free fell 20 meters, feeling his stomach race into his chest until the makeshift harness pulled him back up. Morrison screamed as hard as he could under the tape that coated his mouth, but it did him no good. "You probably get this view often up in your father's tower, huh?" Otto laughed. The younger Morrison just hung his head. Tears were streaming down his face. "It's mighty beautiful, I must say, or at least more beautiful than the concrete walls and bars I had to look at for 10 years. Your father may be a genocidal murderer, but the man knows how to rebuild a city." Otto reached for the duct tape wrapped around Morrison's mouth and ripped it off. James coughed and yelped in pain, but was not quick to speak. He tried turning his head, but Otto palmed the man's skull and turned it back around. "What's the matter, kid? Not how you expected this to go?" "Fuck you! My father will end you!" Otto let out a bellowing cackle that sent a chill up Morrison's spine. "He'll put up a good fight, but you won't be around to see it, kid." Otto held the man up high, with only his left arm, then let go, swiftly catching him with his right arm. "I lost good friends and 10 years of my life because of your father." Otto could see the Empire State Building coming into view. "Now, he's gonna lose 20. "The explosion went off without a hitch, sir. The lieutenant has failed to report in, however," General O'Tonnelly said as he shared the live feed footage of the Navy Yard. The general was proud of the simple yet effective plan, but John Morrison felt somewhat sickened by the thought that he had to bring in an expert for what had turned out to be no more of a threat than the other gangs he had eradicated alone. "I can see his hell chopper in the distance, Dervish. Perhaps my son has a surprise for us." Morrison stood in his same place near the window, peering out at his hostile city. "It doesn't appear to be slowing, sir," the general noted. Morrison flashed a moment of worry across his face and half turned to O'Tonnelly. "Shoot it down," Morrison ordered. O'Tonnelly looked up at the man with slight hesitation. "I said shoot the fucking chopper down," Morrison yelled, rushing his desk and throwing his hands down on top of it. In that same moment, John Morrison could hear the roar of a hell chopper engine speeding towards his tower, his fortress. As he spun to witness what he assumed to be the end, he noticed a large man hanging at the end of a long cable. The chopper cut off forward momentum, and the cabled man slingshotted forward. It was only then that John Morrison saw that he had thrown something at the building. "Sir, get down!" O'Tonnelly yelled as he vaulted over the desk and pulled Morrison to the ground, as glass crashed all around them. Morrison's first instinct was that it was a bomb, but after a moment with no explosion, the man stood and brushed himself off. He surveyed the damaged windows and adjusted his now filthy suit. Meanwhile, the sound of the hell chopper had ceased, disappearing back into the sky. "What did they throw at us, Dervish?" he asked as the general made his way over to the bloodied pile that lay near Morrison's now shattered windows. As O'Tonnelly neared, he realized it was not an explosive, but a body. It was easy to read the general's facial expression when he turned it over, though Morrison wondered why such a vetted soldier would grow sickened by one corpse. "Soldier of yours, General?" Morrison said as he took careful steps over to the body. The general turned and brought a hand to his forehead. John Morrison cocked his head at the general before looking down at the body for himself. The corpse of his only child. There was no change in his expression. John Morrison kneeled before his fallen son and observed all the brutalization he had endured. There were long bits of glass protruding out of his arms and face. Blood striped and dotted his skin. There was a stub where a forearm should have been. It was no more gruesome than his father's death so many years ago, but slowly he could feel that same pain rising. It started in his chest as a sharp pain, and it began to filter through the rest of his body. Have the advisor send someone to clean this up. John Morrison forced from his lips as he stood and wiped his bloody palms on his beige slacks. O'Tonnelly stared at his paymaster, stunned at the lack of empathy, of tears. I never wanted this life for you, Morrison let out as he gave his son one last look before heading for the door.